Hello everyone and welcome to Extreme Graphics Tech, the worst name for a YouTube channel. My name is Angelo and as you know, I haven't uploaded a video in a while, in a little bit. It hasn't been that long, but longer than I wished for. And the reason is because I have COVID. I got it like last week and I think the worst of it has passed, but my muscles, the muscles in my back are killing me. I think that's the worst part at the moment, but hopefully in a couple of days or so, I will be much better. Anyway, I didn't want to leave this channel without content for so long because, you know, YouTube algorithms and all of that, and then, well, you know what happens. You killed your channel before it even starts. So today I want to sort of rehash a video I made for my Spanish YouTube channel talking about CPUs, and the question is, can your old CPU play modern games? You know, October has become like that sort of month where every release seems to be piling up. We had recently the launch of the AMD Ryzen 7000 series, and now, well, today the reviews for the 4090 are coming out, and the card is going to be launched tomorrow, and so is the new Intel Arc GPUs that are going to be launching also on the 12th of October. And as you know, very soon also the new Intel CPU series is going to be launched, and after that is going to be the RDNA 3 AMD card. So there is a lot of things piling up. Fortunately not for me, because I don't have the money or the sponsorship to have all of these new products. However, I still want to give you some advice on some areas, because every time a new CPU is launched, well, everybody gets into a little bit of panic. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people, because they see this as, oh my god, there is a new CPU, it's 30% faster than the old one, I won't be able to play my new games, oh, I need to change. Now, I know there is a lot of enthusiastic people out there. I consider myself one of them, so I don't see anything wrong with if you want to be always at the end of the spectrum and having the latest and the greatest. However, there is a lot of people who really stay like they don't know too much, and they think they need to be on the latest and the greatest to be able to play modern games. And that's what I want to show you in this video today, that you don't need that. So I have an old, 7 years old now, i7 6700K. That was my first CPU that I bought when I got to the UK, that I still have. So what I'm going to do is start showing you that you don't actually need the latest and the greatest. And I know there are older CPUs out there, but you can get sort of an idea, because unfortunately this is the oldest one I have. I know it was top of the line at the time, but it's still 7 years old, and I'm going to show you that you can still have a great video game experience, but also that you need to understand what your goals are when you're trying to get the best out of your CPU. For example, obviously, if your goal is to be at 140, 200 FPS, then yeah, you will need a very beefy CPU depending on the game you want to play. But if your target is, if you are happy with 60 frames per second and anything over that is just gain for you, then you won't be needing like the latest CPU on the market. Also, if you're playing, if you're thinking, well, I'm playing at 1080p at the moment, and my CPU is good because it gives me 100 frames on every game, then, but I now want to play a 4K. Do I need to change my CPU together with my GPU to be able to play? And the answer is mostly no, because the resolution doesn't drive up the CPU. So the CPU is not involved in terms of resolution. So your CPU at the moment could be enough to move the games that you want at the over 60 FPS, even if you're playing a 4K. So instead of spending money on upgrading a CPU, you can put all that money to a GPU, which is more important in that case. Also, there is a very big thing to say when you want to play with ray tracing. If you are a very ray trace enthusiast and you want to get the best of ray tracing, yes, in some case then the CPU will be needing to update, because ray tracing is very CPU dependent too, because you have to, you know, draw calls, and the CPU is involved in this process. So obviously you will need a more beefy CPU. But how much is the question? Do you need the Ryzen 7000 if you already have a Ryzen 5 Series 5? This is the question. If you already have a good enough CPU, in many cases you won't be needing to. But even if you have an old one, you may not need to. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you some games, talk about them. I have paired the i7 6700K together with a 3060 Ti. And I am going to be playing the games at 1080p, because the point here is to take the best of the CPU and not the GPU. So I don't want the GPU to become the bottleneck in here. So I'm going to be using a 1080p as resolution for the games with a 3060 Ti. That should be more than enough, but I also will be activating options like DLSS, because I don't want, as I said, the GPU to be the problem. But I say this because I'm not going to be playing on low quality on the games. I'm going to be playing all the games at ultra quality, and that's because some options in games are also CPU dependent. So if I put everything on low, what is going to happen is that maybe I'm not really being able to see what the CPU is capable in some titles. When, you know, if the draw distance is higher, then it's also going to be affecting the CPU. So it is important to play at ultra in this case. But by using DLSS, I am making sure that the GPU is never bottleneck, but I am using the best options that you can in order to make the CPU become, you know, more to have more strain on it. By using ray tracing in some titles, I will put even more weight on the CPU. So that's what we are going to be testing today. So let's see, and then we come with the conclusions. And the first game we're testing today is Cyberpunk 2077. Of course, we're going to be testing, as I said, at 1080p and DLSS where it's possible, but we're going to use the higher options possible just to, you know, bottleneck that CPU and see how much we can get out of it. And with Ray Tracing Ultra, as you can see right now, the game is running between, I will say, 48 and 65 frames per second. So it's not very stable, but this is still a very playable frame rate. And if you have a VRR monitor, or a monitor that allows you to go up down to 40, you can lock it at 40 and you will probably have a very nice and smooth experience. But as you can see, even with all the ray tracing options, this old CPU is still, you know, working its way and doing some nice work, like I will say. So this is why I'm saying that it will depend very much on what your objectives are, because obviously if you are not interested in playing with the ray tracing, maybe this could be something you can change and just play without ray tracing. Now we are going to test Cyberpunk again, but this time with RT Medium, and as you can see, well, the things has not improved that much, and I think, you know, the CPU is already bottleneck in this case. As you can see up there, the CPU is always kept like a 90 to 100%, and it's obvious that just the ray tracing options we are activating in these games are too much. So it doesn't matter resolution or anything, but that doesn't mean you cannot play with ray tracing even on this old CPU, at least on this title. When we test the game at low ray tracing, we can see that our frame jumped to over 70 frames per second, which means you can still enjoy some RT options in this game and, you know, still have a very good experience. So you always have to pick and choose, and you will have a very nice experience even with an older CPU. And that's the point of these videos, to show you that even with an older CPU you can enjoy many modern features. Yes, maybe you won't be able to be playing with Psycho ray tracing, but remember, I don't think you're going to pair an i7 6700K with a 4090. So I think this is a very good compromise in this case. What do you think? Now, once again, we're testing Cyberpunk, but this time without ray tracing, just to see how much headroom you had between one or the other. And you can see this is a very heavy CPU dependent game. Maybe we should have lowered the amount of pedestrian to medium just to see, but as I said, I'm just trying to put that CPU to the test. And in this case, I think we can still get a very good experience without ray tracing and even with some ray tracing options. But as I said, you always have the option to lower the frame rate to cap it like a 40 or 50, 30, depending on what your monitor allows. And if you have a VR monitor, just let it run whatever you like to. But the point is, we're still having a very good experience with this CPU, so you don't need the greatest and the latest. Now we tested with the Spider-Man, which is a game that have been proven to be very CPU dependent, and well, this is actually the case. You can see the CPU going 100% almost all the time, and this is with ray tracing and every single option at the max setting. But even so, there are moments, you know, where it spikes over 60 frames per second, but of course it's not going to be a very smooth experience if you just leave it like that. But 30 frames per second is a very viable option in this case, or as I said, if you have VRR, you can just leave it on and just leave it with it. I decided to test with the ray tracing a little lower just to see how much of an impact this had in the CPU, and well, the frame rate were a little bit higher, but it's still not enough to have a complete 60 frames per second lock all the time. So sometimes you will get more than that. You can see that it gets even to 70, but sometimes it will get as low as 40 something. But I think that this also has to do with the hard drive, because when it accesses, I can see there are some spikes, and that's because I'm using a mechanical hard drive, unfortunately, and not an SSD, which I don't have at this moment on this particular PC which I'm testing. But you know, I think the CPU is still doing a very good job, all things considered. And well, you know, I decided to try Spider-Man without ray tracing this time just to see, and you can see that the ray tracing is the one that was causing so many issues, because without ray tracing these games run at over 70 frames per second most of the time, and then you can see that the game just run very good even with this i7 6700. So that means that if you have a nice GPU, you will be able to get very good frames even at 4K resolution with this CPU, of course, as long as you are not trying to play with ray tracing, which you can as long as you understand the limitations. And now we get to one of the games that really surprised me the most, and that was Dying Light 2. This game is running with all RT options on, and it's running beautiful. I don't know how it does it. I don't know if the game is more reliant on GPU, but this game is running very good, and you can see the frame time is quite stable, it's quite good. So wow, it surprised me. This is a beautiful game, and with all the RT options on, it looks phenomenal, and you can see you can enjoy that with this CPU. That's why I'm saying it depends a lot on the content you want to play, if you need to change your CPU or not, or you need to invest on a GPU. For example, here you will benefit more from a new GPU than a new CPU. And I think that's the important part, so you know where to put your money in order to get the most out of your games, but also the most of the hardware you actually have right now. Another game that ran very good was God of War. Using the ultra settings, the game always was above 70 frames per second, which means the CPU has no problems handling this game. As you can see, the GPU is close to 100%, but not still, so it means that we are not being GPU bottleneck in this one and any other of the tests we have done so far. However, many of you may be noticing that the frame rate and frame times are all over the place. It looks very, you know, like a cardiogram. You see, this is the heart rate, a heartbeat. So you will say, well, you know, that doesn't feel very good. It may be, well, it depends if you have a VRR monitor or not. However, I want to show you in the next test something that you can do to show you that the CPU will deliver. And now I have limited the frame rate to 60 FPS. And look at that frame rate and at that frame time graph. It's just perfect. It's spotless. There is no spike and no down, nothing. If you start using these sort of tools, you know, just to keep your frame rate in check, then you won't have those variants that we may or may you think that there is like, you know, a stuttering or something going on there that is not giving you that smooth experience. Look at that. It's just beautiful, and there is room to spare for this game to never really fluctuate, maybe in some extreme case, but you know, you have room to keep this game as silky smooth all the time. So that's important too, and it's one of those things that people need to keep in mind with this sort of GPUs, to always or cap the frame rate as much as possible. Now, another, you know, favorite of many people is Red Dead Redemption 2. And of course, it was a game developed for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and it ran very good at the time, so obviously it's going to run very good on PC. However, remember, PC has many options to improve the graphical detail, and many of those options will have an impact on the CPU. Even though many of those options have obviously a bigger impact on the GPU, the truth is that in many occasions that is going to impact the CPU too, like draw distance, like you know, the foliage and the quality of many of the other the trees and the quality of the trees, tessellation, and many other options. This is at the max setting that the game has, and we are close to 100 frames per second. So that means that you could even clock this game at 60 FPS and go even beyond the max settings and activate more of the options that are available inside the game. It's just ridiculous how good this game runs, and another proof that you don't need the latest CPU to enjoy gaming on a higher level. So after seeing all the games that we played today, we can see we have very surprising results. An i7 6700K is still more than capable to play most of the games, not only at 60 FPS, but even over 60 FPS, even with ray tracing active. That's, to me, is surprising to see how much CPU power we still have and how we don't need the latest and the greatest to be able to really get the best out of these games. Of course, many of you will say, well, better CPU will give you better 1% low and 1% lows, and that's true. But you have to, you know, evaluate the case, because maybe the games that are more affected are games that you don't really play. So it's important to have that balance, and maybe you, instead of having an i7 6700K, you have already an AMD Ryzen 3600, which is more than enough then, in this case, to keep playing for many years to come. As you can see, if this old CPU can, an AMD Ryzen 3700 will, or a 5600. So what I'm trying to say is that people get too obsessed about numbers, and then they start worrying and they start spending money and without the need for. And in this case, we can see we can get most games to play very good. Of course, as I said, if you want to play like 144 Hz and more, yes, you probably will need a more beefy CPU. But if you have a monitor that is just 60 Hz, there is no point on going over. And on God of War, we saw that if you cap the frame rate at 60, you get a flawless experience, like perfect frame time all the time. So that's also important to you know, cap frames to, you know, what you want or what your monitor is capable, to avoid that frame time spiking and going up and giving you sort of an unbalanced experience when you're playing video games. So that's another very important thing. And also on some games that maybe they didn't go that good, or they were playing between 50 and 60, if you have a VRR monitor, you can cap the game to 40 Hz, which is going to give you a middle of the road between 30 and 60. Yes, middle of the road, because that's the frame time. The frame time is going to be exactly in the middle. Okay, it's not 45, it's 40, so you can block it there and you will have a very nice experience. But even so, if you don't have a monitor like this and you don't care and you prefer like graphical fidelity, as we said before, you can always cap the game 30 frames per second, and this CPU will still deliver a very good quality on many titles. And I think on most of the titles we saw today, which are very, you know, heavy AAA games, the i7 6700K was still awesome CPU for many games. So if, you know, you're looking for a cheap computer or a cheap CPU, you can get one with this. They are like for $70 or even less, depending where you get it. you obviously used. You're not going to get them new. They're 7 years old, but you know, it could be a good option if you're trying to build a PC that allows you to play even modern games at a decent quality without having to spend, you know, on new platform, DDR5 and all that, and saving you a lot of money in the process. So I think this is a good option, or any equivalent. Maybe you find a 7700K, which is a newer generation. You know, it's still going to give you a very good quality experience of gaming. So my point with this video was only to show you that you don't need the greatest and the latest, and maybe the CPU you have is still more than capable. So if you want to see how good that CPU is on the games, and if you can upgrade your GPU, my recommendation will be to lower the resolution to the minimum you can, keeping the settings as higher as you can, and see how much frames per second that CPU can produce on the game. And now if it produces you 80, 90 FPS in that situation, then you know that you are going to be still playing at that frame rate if you update your GPU, because the CPU is more than powerful enough. So I hope this information I gave you today was good. I know the information wasn't presented as well as I could. I'm still a little bit foggy with the sickness. I hope I can get well very soon, so you know this situation improves and I can bring better quality content. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.